Nobody chose the one-legged schoolteacher until the richest rancher in the valley chose her. The deed was in my coat pocket the morning I rode into Harlan Flats, and I had already decided to sell. That was November of 1887. I was 58 years old, which felt older then than it does now in the telling. I had 16,000 acres straddling Cutter Creek, more cattle than I could count in my head without a ledger, a house so big that it took a lamp in every room to keep the dark out, and not one person inside it I was glad to come home to. My foreman, Asab Briggs, lived with the hands in the bunkhouse a quarter-mile from the main house. My sister had married and moved to Sacramento 11 years before that. The last woman to sleep in my house had been my wife Alina, dead 4 winters by then from a fever that came on a Tuesday and was done with her by Friday. I had tried very hard not to think about Alina, and I had succeeded mainly by keeping busy, which I was good at, and which is a thing a man can do almost indefinitely if he puts his mind to it. The deed was for the north pasture lot, 40 acres I had fenced off 10 years back and never used. I told myself I was selling it because the fence maintenance wasn't worth what the land was bringing in. That was a lie I told comfortably, the way a man does when the lie is small enough that he doesn't have to look at it straight. The real reason was simpler and considerably worse. I was tired of owning things. Tired of the accounting of it, the upkeep of it, the way things you own keep requiring you to decide what you want them for, and I had run out of answers for that question somewhere in the years after Alina. 40 acres seemed like a manageable amount to be done with. I should probably say something about what those 4 years had been, because it matters for understanding what came after. I was not a man given to self-pity. I have always had a low tolerance for it in others and even less in myself. But I was, in the winter of 1887, something that I did not know the word for at the time and would only name much later. I was going through the days. I got up before dawn and I worked, and I made decisions about the herd and the hands and the fencing and the water rights, and I ate, and I slept, and I did it again. The work was real, and I was good at it, and it was not nothing. But somewhere inside all of that activity, I had gone very quiet in a way I barely noticed, because I was so busy not noticing it. Asa had said something to me once. This was the previous spring, May, I think, after the first good week of weather. He'd come in to go over the breeding records, and we were at the table in my office, and he stopped halfway through and looked at me and said, "You all right, Mr. Calloway?" I said I was fine. He looked at me for another moment and then went back to the records. Asa was not a man who said things twice. But I thought about that look for a long time afterward. The truth was I did not know if I was all right. I knew I was functional. I knew I was solvent and competent and respected in the valley, and that men relied on me, and I did not let them down. What I did not know was what any of it was for. Alina had been the answer to that question, or part of the answer, and when she went the question was still there, but the answer was not, and I had dealt with this the only way I knew how, which was to stay busy enough that the question could not get a word in edgewise. The north pasture had been Alina's idea, originally. She had wanted to put a kitchen garden on the near end of it, something with more sun than the house plot got. We had talked about it for a year, and then she was gone, and the kitchen garden was never put in, and I fenced the whole 40 and didn't use it. Every time I looked at that fence, I knew why I had it, and I didn't want to know, so I decided to sell it. That was the logic. I came into Flats to sign the papers at Lund's office and be done by noon. That was the whole of my plan. I had not planned on Clara Aldridge. I should say first that I knew of her. You could not live in that valley and not. She had been teaching at the Flats schoolhouse for 3 years by then, arrived from somewhere in Ohio, hired on because the previous teacher, a Mr. Hiram Pell, had taken a position in Denver, and the school board was running short on options. She was young, 30 or thereabouts, and she was missing her left leg below the knee, lost in a farm accident when she was a girl, and she walked with a crutch, a plain wooden thing, worn smooth at the top where her palm had worked it for years. The valley had opinions about this, as valleys always do. The opinions ran somewhere between pity and a low-level embarrassment, the kind of embarrassment that has more to do with the person feeling it than with anything the subject has done. Some of the men on the school board had voted against hiring her on the grounds that the children would stare. The women in town, with 2 or 3 exceptions, treated her with the particular kindness that is really a form of distance, a kindness that keeps you on the other side of a glass. She taught school regardless. The children, as it turned out, stopped staring after about the first week and started learning things. I had never spoken to her. I had seen her twice at a distance, once through the window of the mercantile, once crossing in front of the livery, moving with a deliberateness that I noticed and then looked away from. The looking away was not discomfort, exactly. More that she had a quality I did not know how to file. A woman moving through a world that had decided what it thought of her, moving through it anyway, unbothered by the deciding. I didn't know what to do with that at the time, so I looked away from it. So, November of 1887, I tied my horse to the rail in front of Lund's title office, and that was when I heard the crowd. It was on the far side of Main Street in front of the school board building, not a large crowd, 8 or 9 people, but with that particular quality that a crowd takes on when it is working itself up to something. You can feel it at a distance. Something in the sound of it, the collective forward lean of it. I recognized Carlson, who ran the grist mill, and 2 of his brothers, heavy-set men with flour on their boots. Mrs. Dearborn, who had the only hotel in Flats, and who ran it the way a general runs a campaign. 3 or 4 others whose names I didn't have, but whose faces I'd seen at enough county meetings to know they were the kind of men who showed up to things. They were all facing the door of the school board building, and from inside I could hear 2 voices, one of them Harmon Price, the board chairman, talking at a good clip, and another voice, quieter, a woman's voice, trying to answer him. I went into Lund's office. There was nothing to be done about a crowd from a distance, and I had papers to sign. Lund poured me a drink, and I sat with it at his window while he found the deed in his files, and I watched the street. The voices inside the school board office were not audible from Lund's window, but the crowd's attention was. They were listening to something in the same way a jury listens, alert, already decided, waiting to deliver. After about 5 minutes, the woman's voice stopped. The door opened. Clara Aldridge came out. I knew it was her from the crutch. She had a coat on, gray wool, and her hair was pinned and there were papers under her arm, and she came down the 2 steps from the door with the crutch placed precisely, not tentatively, and she went down those steps and not one person in that small crowd said a word. They just watched her, that specific kind of watching that means. This was the outcome, and now we are witnessing it being carried out. She came down onto the street, and she turned and she walked up Main, and her face as she walked, I could see it clearly from Lund's window, was doing a very specific thing. It was doing nothing. It was doing nothing at all, which is the thing a face does when a person has decided that the people watching them will not have the satisfaction of seeing what this costs. She walked up the street in that gray coat with her chin level and her crutch moving, and in a very short time she was past the cottonwoods at the far end and out of view. I drank the rest of my whiskey. "What was that?" I asked Lund. He had the deed out by then and was smoothing it on his desk. He made the face a man makes when he is about to repeat something that troubles him. The board had voted 5-2 not to renew Clara Aldridge's contract. The official reasons were administrative, restructuring of the district, possible consolidation with the school at Greer's Crossing, budget concerns. The actual reason, which Lund related with the careful precision of a man who wanted to be accurate without getting into it himself, was that several prominent families had raised concerns. Their children, these families felt, required a teacher who presented a more, and Harmon Price had apparently actually used this word, complete image of authority. "Complete," I said. Lund moved papers. "That's what was said." I signed the deed. I folded my copy and put it in my coat pocket and went out. I untied my horse. I stood on the street for about half a minute. Then I led the horse up Main toward the cottonwoods. She was at the far end of the trees, on the edge of the open plain. She had stopped, and she was not moving. Not crying, not anything visible, just standing at the edge of the open ground looking out at the plain, which was brown and gray and wide under a November sky that had gone the color of dirty pewter. The wind was in the dry grass. I pulled up a few yards back. She heard the horse and turned. "Miss Aldridge," I said, "I'm George Calloway. My ranch is out on Cutter Creek." She looked at me. She had dark eyes, sharp-featured face, good bones, the look of a woman who had thought hard about things, and it showed. She held the papers tight against her coat. "I know who you are," she said. "I'm sorry about what happened in there." She took a moment with that. "Were you in the meeting, Mr. Calloway?" "No." "Then you don't know what happened in there." "I heard some from outside." "I know Harmon Price." Something shifted in her expression. Not softer, more like she made a small adjustment to account for the fact that I might not be entirely useless. Then you know, she said. I believe so, I said. She looked back out at the plain. I sat on my horse and let the quiet stand, because there wasn't anything useful I could add to it, and I knew that. The plain was empty in every direction. After a long minute, she said, without looking at me, I have 22 students. 14 of them could not read when school started in September. They can now, or most of them. There is a boy, his father told him school was a waste of time. He came 3 miles on foot this week to return a book he had borrowed from me because he didn't want me to have to wait for it. She paused. He's 10 years old and he walked 6 miles round trip to return a book. Another pause. That's what happened in there. I said nothing because there was nothing to say. She nodded one small nod, not to me, to herself, like she was putting something down that she'd been carrying. And she set the crutch under her arm and walked back up the street, and I watched her go. I rode home. I sat by the fire that night with a glass of whiskey I did not drink very much of, and I thought about Alina, which I did not usually let myself do, and then about a boy walking 3 miles to return a book, and then about the face Clara Aldridge had made coming down those steps. Not the face she'd made talking to me at the Cottonwoods, which was careful and controlled. The one on the steps, the one she hadn't known I was watching. I went to bed at 9 o'clock and lay in the dark until I understood what I was going to do, and then I went to sleep. In the morning, I rode back to Flats. I want to be clear about what drove me, because I am not a man who likes to present himself better than he is. Part of it was the simple stubbornness that I have always had about injustice. I have been that way my whole life, and it has cost me. It cost me a business partnership in 1874 and nearly my life in a different situation in 1878, the details of which do not matter here, and I have never been able to reason myself out of it. You can know that a thing is not your business and still not be able to walk away from it. I had known that about myself for a long time. But there was the other part, the part I did not examine right away. I kept seeing her face at the edge of those cottonwoods, not the controlled face, the one she'd aimed at the crowd. The one when she thought no one was close enough to see. The one where she had been standing at the edge of the plain and you could see, just for a moment, what this cost. And the way she had said, that's what happened in there, like she was giving testimony. Like she wanted the record to include the boy walking 6 miles so that someone knew. I don't know when a woman had last spoken to me that way. Like I was a man who could be given the truth and trusted to stand it. I went to Harmon Price's office. Price and I had a history. Not a bad one, not a good one, the history of 2 men who have shared a valley for 25 years and needed things from each other at various intervals, and maintained the kind of working respect that does not have much warmth in it. He was a precise man, Price, kept good records, paid his bills on time, ran the board with the same careful attention he gave everything, which was considerable but which had a narrowness to it. He could not see past what things were supposed to be. It was a limitation he'd had his whole life, and he was not going to get past it now at 60. He owed me specifically for a water rights co-signature in 1884 that had saved his South property from a county dispute that would have gone badly for him. He knew he owed me, and he was uncomfortable about that the way a careful man is uncomfortable about debts he cannot easily pay. He preferred things balanced. I sat down in his office without being invited to, and I told him I wanted the board to reconsider the decision about Miss Aldridge. He arranged his expression into the one he used for complicated situations, and he gave me the speech. Board process, community input, the concerns of several prominent families. Certain logistical realities about the district, the possibility of consolidation at Greer's Crossing. He gave the whole speech, measured and thorough, and I let him give it, because letting a man give his full speech costs nothing, and sometimes a man who has given his full speech is more willing to listen than one who was interrupted partway through. When he finished, I let a short silence sit, and then I said, Harmon, who voted against her hiring 3 years ago. He blinked. That's not. You and one other. Everyone else voted to hire her. In 3 years, the attendance is up, the parents' complaints about the quality of instruction are down, and she has not had a single disciplinary incident. You know this because you see the records. The concerns raised by certain families are about the way she walks, I said, not about how she teaches. He did not deny it. A careful man doesn't deny things he can't deny. Then I told him what I was prepared to do. The school building roof had leaked for 3 winters. The north wall had 2 cracked windows that had been stuffed with rags since the hard January 2 years before. The board had solicited repair funds twice. I had declined to contribute because the board's management of those funds was not, in my judgment, adequate. I told Price I would pay for all of it, roof, windows, the full rebuilding of the north wall framing if it needed it, if the contract was renewed for at least 2 years. And I told him, without raising my voice or making any kind of display, that the Callaway operation had employed more men in this valley than any other single enterprise for 40 years, and that I had not yet determined whether I intended to continue purchasing my supplies through flats or whether I might find the arrangement at Greer's Crossing more suitable. Greer's Crossing was not more suitable. The road alone would cost me an extra half-day every month, but Price did not need that information. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and listened to all of it and then looked at his hands. "I'll need to consult the other board members," he said. "By Thursday," I said. I heard back Wednesday. The contract would be renewed. Certain logistical concerns had been re-examined in light of new information. No specifics offered, and none were needed. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something that took me a few days to name precisely. What I felt was that I had acted like someone I recognized. There had been a long time since I'd started selling parcels, since I'd stopped going into town unless I had strictly had to. There had been a long time where I had not been sure who I was doing anything for or what it was for. This was different. This had a clear reason, and I had done it, and it was done. I sent word out to Assad that the north pasture fence was to stay up, and that I was pulling the deed from sale. He sent back a note that said, "Good." That was Assad. I did not go to Clara Aldridge and tell her what I had done. I understood, without having to think about it for very long, that she would not want to have been bargained for, however well the bargaining had gone. A woman who keeps a crutch worn smooth by 20 years of daily use does not want to be told that someone else moved the board on her behalf. I understood that. So December came and the school continued, and I had business in flats 2 or 3 times a week, more than was strictly necessary. And on a Wednesday afternoon in the 2nd week of December, I passed the schoolhouse at the end of the day, and I could see through the window that the children were still at their desks. I could see the back of Clara Aldridge standing at the board, writing something. The room had the quality that a room has when children are genuinely paying attention, a kind of charged stillness, the kind that can't be produced, it just occurs or it doesn't. I did not stop. I wrote on. But the following Wednesday, I found myself passing at the same hour, and the Wednesday after that. On the 3rd Wednesday, she was coming out as I passed. She had her coat buttoned and the crutch under her arm and a considerable stack of papers under the other, and she looked up at me with an expression that suggested she had noticed me passing and had been wondering how long it would continue. "Mr. Callaway," she said. "Miss Aldridge, cold day." "Very." I asked without any particular plan whether she had eaten. She said she'd been going back to her boarding room to make something. I asked if she'd like to eat at the hotel dining room. She looked at me for a moment with that quick internal accounting she did, and then she said yes, she would. We ate at Dearborn's dining room. This produced, as I expected, a moderate amount of notice. Mrs. Dearborn took our orders with the careful courtesy of a woman who wanted it known that she was being courteous. 2 men at the far table looked at us when we came in, and then looked at each other, and then went back to their food. Clara did not appear to notice any of it or chose not to. She ate a bowl of venison stew and a piece of cornbread, and she talked about her students the way a person talks about the thing they care about more than anything else in the world. The boy who had walked back the book was named Emmett Greer. She told me his father had, 2 weeks ago, asked her to keep Emmett after school for extra reading help. This, she explained, was the father's way of saying he had changed his mind about school being a waste of time. "Did you tell him it was?" I asked. "That he had changed his mind. That he was wrong." She looked at me across the table with those dark eyes. "Would you have told him?" I thought about it honestly. I said no. "People need to arrive at their own conclusions," she said. "Particularly men who have been certain they were right." A slight pause. "You can show them the door, but you can't walk them through it." I had the feeling she was not entirely talking about Emmett's father. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She asked me about the ranch in a way that was genuinely curious, not polite, about how the land was organized, how the water rights worked along Cutter Creek, what the winters had done to the herd since the terrible one in '86. She listened the way very few people listen, which is to say she was entirely present in what I was saying rather than standing outside it waiting to respond. I had not been listened to like that in a long time, and I did not realize how much I had missed it until it was happening again. When we left, I walked her back to her boarding house. At the door, she turned and looked at me with that full, direct gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," she said, and then, "I expect you'll be passing the schoolhouse on Wednesday." It was not a question. "Most likely," I said. She went inside. I stood on the street for a moment, and then I went and got my horse and I rode home, and I didn't feel hollow riding home, which was something. December passed. January came in hard and cold. We had supper on Wednesdays and occasionally on Saturdays. We walked when the weather permitted it. She managed the frozen ground and the uneven places with a sureness that I stopped thinking about after a short while because it was simply part of how she moved. The same way her directness was part of how she spoke, and you stopped noticing it as a separate thing. She lent me Huckleberry Finn at the end of December, and I read it in 3 days, which I have mentioned was the first book I had read in 4 years. We talked about it at our next supper, and she pointed out things I had missed, which was most of it, and I pointed out things she hadn't considered, which was less but still something, and by the end of it I felt like I had read the book twice. There was a Saturday in the middle of January when we walked out beyond the end of town on the road toward the creek. The cold had broken for a day, and the mud had frozen back solid, and the sky was that particular winter blue that has no warmth in it but is beautiful nonetheless. She had good boots, a detail I noticed, that her boots were good and well-maintained, and she moved well on the frozen ruts, and we walked for nearly a mile before we turned back. She had been talking about a girl in her class, one of the youngest, named Petra Sanchez. Petra's family had come up from Sonora 2 years before, and the girl spoke English but was afraid to use it in front of others, which Clara was working on with her patiently, 1 word at a time. "She reads better than she speaks," Clara said. "In reading, she's not embarrassed because no one can hear her making mistakes. So I have her read aloud to me after school, just the 2 of us, and then we talk about what she read. Now she'll answer questions in class if I ask her directly, though she'd never volunteer." "How long before she volunteers?" "When she believes it matters more to be understood than to be safe," Clara said. "It's different for everyone. Some people get there fast, some never do." She said the last part without emphasis, looking at the road, and I thought she was not entirely talking about Petra Sanchez. "Which one were you?" I said. She glanced at me sideways. "I had no choice," she said. "When you look the way I look, you cannot spend your life waiting until it feels safe to speak. You speak or you disappear. I learned that at about 9 years old." We walked for a while. The road was empty out here and our breath went up in the cold. "I think I disappeared," I said after a while. She did not respond right away, then simply, "I know." 2 words. The way she said them told me she had noticed, had been watching, had a clear view of what 4 years of keeping busy looked like from the outside. And she was not offering an opinion about it or a remedy. She was just acknowledging that she saw it, and that what she saw was a man who had been present in the most minimal possible way and was, perhaps, beginning to be otherwise. I did not say anything else, and neither did she. We turned back toward town, and the cold came back into the air, and somewhere ahead a dog was barking at something. And I felt the way you feel when something has been said that doesn't need any more said around it. In late January, she asked about Alina. Not intrusively. We had been talking about the ranch, about what it had been like in the early years when I had first built the main house, and she asked whether I had built it for a family. And I said I had Alina and I had expected children, and the children had not come. And Alina had died 4 years ago, and the house was too large for one man, but I had stopped thinking about selling it the way I had stopped thinking about a lot of things, which was by not thinking about it. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, matter-of-factly, "What was she like?" I thought about that. Most people, when they ask about a dead wife, are asking with a performance of sympathy that has a boundary around it. They want you to say she was wonderful and leave it at that, so they can respond with appropriate gravity and move on. Clara was not asking that way. "She was patient," I said. "Patient with me in particular. I am not an easy man, too quick to argue. She had a way of waiting me out that I never appreciated enough at the time." I paused. "She was funny, drier than you'd expect from looking at her. She looked gentle. She was kind, but she had a backbone in it." She sounds like someone I would have liked, Clara said. It was the right thing to say, and she didn't make a production of saying it. She would have liked you, I said. She had no patience for pretension. She would have liked you very much. Clara looked down at her coffee. Something passed across her face that she didn't pursue. After a moment, she said, "It's a hard thing to stop being half of something." Yes, I said, that was all. It was enough. The evening in January, when Price told her. I found out about it the following Wednesday when she walked out of the schoolhouse, and her face had that particular set to it, the one she kept for things that had required her to make a decision about how to carry them. We sat at the usual table. She was quiet through most of the stew, and I let the quiet sit, and eventually she set her spoon down. Harmon Price said something to me. I did not say anything. He told me I should thank you. He was not gracious about how he said it, so I am not certain what exactly I was meant to thank you for. He seemed to expect that I already knew. She looked at me steadily. I didn't. I looked at the fire at the far end of the room. He should have kept his mouth shut, I said. Perhaps, but since he didn't. I set down my coffee and told her plain. I had gone to Price and told him to renew the contract. I had offered to pay for the school repairs and implied I might take my business out of flats. He was a practical man, and he had reconsidered. She listened to all of it without expression. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You didn't ask me." "No. I might not have wanted that. I know. I am not something to be arranged, Mr. Calloway." "No," I said, "you're not. What you are is the best teacher in this valley, possibly the best that school has had, and you see those children in a way that nobody else in this town is going to see them, and Harmon Price was going to throw you out because the way you walk makes him uncomfortable. I had the ability to stop it, and I did. If I was wrong to do it without telling you first, I am sorry for that. I am not sorry I did it." She held my gaze for a long time. I didn't look away from it. "You should have told me," she said at last. "Yes. I should have. If you do something like that again, you tell me first, before." "I will." She nodded, a slight pause, then. "The north window in room 2 doesn't close properly. There's a gap in the frame. I have a rag in it, but it doesn't do much against a real wind." I looked at her. "I'll send someone out," I said. "I would appreciate that." She picked up her spoon. After a moment, "Thank you, George." First time she had said my name. I went home that night and sat by the fire for a long time, and the house did not feel quite as large as it usually did. February was one of the mean ones. 3 nights running the cold came down hard enough to kill livestock, and I was out in it myself each of those nights, because you cannot ask men to check on calves every hour in that cold unless you are willing to do it too, and I was. I came in from the 3rd night with my hands clumsy and a cough that had settled deep in the middle of my chest and showed no interest in moving. By the 2nd week, I was bad enough that Sam made me stay in the house. I resisted, which I always do, and I was too wrung out to resist effectively, which does not happen often. Asa rode in to tell Clara. I didn't ask him to. He did it because Asa has his own ideas about what I need, and he has been right about them with a consistency that I find irritating and depend on. She arrived on a Thursday, which was not one of our usual days. She came in with her basket and her face that said she was not there to tend to my feelings, but to the situation. She made a chest poultice with things from her basket. I did not ask what was in it, and she did not explain it, and sat with me for 2 hours, and had me drink something that tasted like it had been boiled out of something that shouldn't be boiled. Bitter and hot and possibly effective. She brought her student papers and worked through them at the chair beside my bed and did not try to make conversation, which was exactly right, because talking made the cough worse. At some point I slept. When I came back up, it was dark and the lamp was burning, and she was still there, still in the chair, still with the papers, making notes in the margins of something. There was a bowl covered with a cloth on the table beside me, soup, still warm when I put my hand near it. I watched her for a moment without saying anything. The lamp put good light on her face, and she was frowning at a page the way she frowned at things she was not yet satisfied with, and she was entirely contained in it, without any performance of carefulness about a sick man in the room. She was just there. "You should go," I said. "The road is bad and it's late." She looked up at me. "Emmett Greer's father has a room in town." He said he would bring me back in the morning. You asked him? I told him I was staying and he offered to drive me in the morning. The road will be passable by then. She capped her pen. Drink the soup. I pulled myself up and ate the soup. Venison and root vegetables, something with a bite to it, pepper, and something else I couldn't name. You made this here, I said. Your kitchen is adequate. You have good root vegetables in the cellar. I ate. The soup was very good. Outside, the wind had picked up, and I could hear it in the eaves, the particular sound this house made in a north wind, which I had always known, and had stopped noticing until this moment when someone else was in the house to hear it with me. You didn't need to come, I said. No. You have school tomorrow. I'm aware of that. I looked at her. Why did you come? She set the papers down. She looked at me with the look that was her full attention, all of it, the way she gave it. Because I wanted to come, she said, simply not dressed up. Because I was worried. That sat in the room for a moment. I'll be fine, I said. Yes, she said, you will. Not as reassurance, as a fact she had already determined and was informing me of. I believed it. By March I was well, and the valley began doing what valleys do. I had not been unaware that Clara and I were being watched. You cannot spend a Sunday in Dearborn's dining room with a woman 3 times in a month without the valley developing an opinion. I had not paid close attention to those opinions, which was a habit of mine. I had enough standing in the valley that people's opinions of what I did had less practical weight than they might have had for someone with less. But in March, I started noticing things more specifically. There were conversations that stopped when we came into the hotel dining room. There were looks, the kind that aren't quite stares but are close. Mrs. Dearborn remained perfectly courteous and perfectly behind glass. Price, when he passed us on the street, tipped his hat to me and looked at a point just past Clara. There was a family named Birch, owned a timber operation on the north side of the valley, 3 grown sons who had their father's size and their own loud opinions. And they had apparently told someone at the feed store that it was a strange thing, Calloway taking up with the schoolteacher with the crippled leg. Asa told me this. He had been at the feed store when one of the Birch sons repeated it, and he had told the Birch son that he was saying it in the feed store, which had ended the conversation. Asa was a quiet man, but he had a way of ending conversations. Clara knew about it. She didn't say so, but I could see it. In the particular way she sat in the hotel dining room with her back to the room, the slight deliberateness about the way she moved through Main Street. Something careful that was not usually there. One afternoon in March, a Sunday, we rode out along Cutter Creek and found a flat rock in a bend where the sun had some warmth in it, sheltered from the wind. We sat. She had her crutch across her lap and she was looking at the water going over the rocks. After a while she said, still looking at the water, "You know what they're saying." "Some of it. Does it trouble you?" I thought about that honestly. "It troubles me that people are small," I said, "and the way it's directed at you specifically troubles me more than that." She turned a small stone over in her fingers. "I have been a curiosity my whole life," she said, not bitterness, not complaint, the flat accounting of a fact she had long since finished being surprised by. "In Ohio. Here, wherever I have been, people see the leg first. Some of them only ever see the leg. They decide what that means and they're done." "What does it mean?" I said. She looked at me sideways, not offended, checking something. "You know what it means to them. Incomplete, limited, something to feel sorry for or something to point at, depending on the day." "I'm asking what it means to you." She was quiet for a moment. The water ran. A hawk swung wide over the plain to the west, riding something in the air. "It means I know what it is to have people make a decision about you before they've looked at you," she said. "That's what it means. I know that feeling very well, and I decided a long time ago that it wasn't going to be the most important thing about me." She paused. "Whether I succeeded is another question." "You succeeded," I said. She looked at me with those dark eyes. "You've known me 4 months." "I know," I said. "It took me about 3 weeks." She looked at the water. After a moment, the corner of her mouth moved. "What do you see," I said, "when you look at me?" She was quiet for a while, a real while. "I see a man who walked across a street in November because something was wrong and somebody should say so," she said. "I see a man who then didn't tell me what he'd done about it, for reasons that were well-intentioned and wrong." A pause. I see a man who read Huckleberry Finn in 3 days and didn't want to admit that he cried at the end. I didn't cry. You are a poor liar, she said. I see a man who has been alone in a large house for 4 years and has been running on habit and stubbornness. She looked at me. And I see a man who sat at the edge of those cottonwoods on a very cold November morning and didn't say anything useful, and somehow that was the exactly right thing. Someone who stood still and didn't flinch from it. She looked back at the water. That is not nothing. I looked at the hawk making its long circle. Most people don't see that, I said. Most people aren't looking, she said. You are not a complicated man, George. You are just not seen very well by most people. That is their failure, not yours. I had not heard that said to me. I had not known I needed to hear it. The afternoon warmed. The creek made its particular sound over that particular bend of rocks. Clara had set the stone aside, and her hand was resting on the flat rock between us, and I put my hand over hers. She turned her hand and held mine, her grip firm and plain. We sat that way until the sun went behind the hills, and the rock went cold, and we said very little else. And the little else we said was about the creek and the hawk and what we'd eat for supper, and all of it was enough. We came into April. There was an evening in the first week of it, a Tuesday, not one of our usual evenings, when I rode into Flats for supplies and found her at the schoolhouse later than normal. I could see the lamp still burning inside when I came past. I tied up and went to the door and knocked, and she said, "Come in." She was at the board, erasing the day's writing. The room smelled of chalk dust and the smoke from the stove, which was still warm though the fire had been banked an hour. The small desks in their rows. The books on the shelf along the side wall, she had added to them since I had first seen this room, mostly donations she'd organized herself, a letter-writing campaign she'd run to the county and to churches in Denver. There were twice as many books now as there had been when she'd arrived. I stood in the doorway and looked at the room for a moment. "You're still here," I said. "I was finishing the marks." She set down the eraser and turned. She had chalk on her hands and on the sleeve of her dress, and she didn't appear to notice. "What brought you in?" "Supplies. I was passing." She looked at me steadily, the way she did when she was determining whether something was true. "You passed the general store 3 blocks back," she said. "I did." "You came past the school first." "I did," I said. She looked at me for a moment longer, and then she went to the wash basin in the corner and rinsed her hands. I came fully into the room and stood at the edge of the nearest desk. The room looked different at this hour, with just the one lamp and the dark windows. Smaller, more like the inside of something important. "What's on the board?" I said. "Grammar 3rd grade." She dried her hands on the cloth beside the basin. "They're working on when a sentence needs more than it has." "Is that how you describe it?" "When it needs more than it has." She looked at me across the room. "Are we talking about grammar?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe not entirely." She folded the cloth and set it back. She picked up her coat from the chair. I held it for her while she put it on. The first time I had done that, held a coat for her, a small thing that felt larger than it should have. And when she turned, the crutch was under her arm, and she looked up at me, and I was close enough to see the chalk dust on her cheek that she had missed. I reached over and brushed it off, my thumb against her cheekbone. She was very still. We stood like that for a moment in the lamplight in the empty schoolroom, with the chalk and the rows of small desks and the shelf of books she had written letters to get. And I thought, this is a woman I want to come home to. Not a general thought. That specific thought about that specific woman in that specific room. I took her to supper. We walked the 3 blocks to Dearborn's in the April dark, and she told me about the grammar lesson, and I told her about a fence repair I was putting off, and we talked about neither of these things in particular, because what we were doing was simply being in each other's company, which had become something I counted on more than I had noticed until recently. I proposed in April. I am not a man who excels at declaration, and I knew this about myself, so I decided that the only honest way was the plainest way. I had told her 2 weeks prior that I intended to ask her to marry me. She had been quiet for a moment, not surprised, I thought, but weighing, and then said she thought she would want to think about that. I told her I would wait. It was a Saturday evening, end of April, still light at 7. We were sitting on the front porch of the ranch house, which was the first time she had been there. She had looked at the house when we rode up, all of it, the size, the way it sat on the land, the porch, and had not said anything in particular about it. "I've thought about it," she said. I waited. She was looking out at the plain. The light was red and long at the end of the day. I spent a long time being managed, she said. My father managed me carefully with good intentions, but it was managing. He had decided what my life would be able to hold, and he tried to keep me inside that. The men who ran the school board in Ohio managed me. The board here. She paused. There is a way of treating someone where everything they do is evaluated as either more or less than what you expected from them, where they are never just what they are. They are always performing relative to a prior judgment. She looked at the plain. I am very tired of that. I know, I said. You don't always know, she said. You went and moved the board without asking me. You had good reasons. They were still your reasons. Yes. I am not something to be provided for, she said. I am not something to be protected as a project. I am a person with a full life of my own and opinions about what I want it to include. I know you are. And you will sometimes do things that I think are wrong, and when you do, I will tell you, and you will listen. Yes, I said, that's the arrangement I want. She looked at me then fully. The light was good on her face. I have been thinking, she said, about a man who walked across a street in November, about why he did it, about the fact that he did not do it to get anything from me. He did it because something was wrong and he couldn't let it alone. She paused. There are not very many people like that. I have not met many. I have been looking for them my whole life, without knowing that was what I was doing. I looked at her. Clara, I said, will you marry me? She looked at me for a long moment. The red light was on the plain and on her face, and the wind was very slight, and somewhere out past the barn I could hear a horse moving in the paddock. Yes, she said. I let out a breath I had been holding for several weeks. She put her hand on my arm and looked at me. George, she said, you can breathe. I did, and then I laughed, which surprised me because I had not expected to laugh. It was a genuine one, the kind that comes from somewhere below planning, and she was smiling when I looked at her. A real smile, the whole thing, not the controlled small version she gave most people. I reached over and took her hand and held it, and we sat like that on the porch of the large, quiet house until the red was gone from the sky and the first stars were out, and I did not feel like the house was too big. We married in June, on a Saturday at the church in Flats, which was full. In a valley where the richest rancher marries anyone, the church is full. In a valley where he marries the schoolteacher with one leg, the church is full, and every person in it has an opinion they are doing their best to keep off their face. I had no objection to this. Let them come. Let them see it. Clara had a dress made by a seamstress in the county seat. Dark blue, not white. I had expected nothing, and the dark blue was right. She came down the aisle of that church on her crutch, at her own pace, without any help offered or available, and she came to the front and stood beside me and looked at me with those dark eyes, and the whole church was quiet. The minister read the words. We said what we needed to say. I put the ring on her finger, and she looked at it for a moment, not at me, at the ring itself, like she was verifying that it was real, and then she looked up at me. I will carry that look. It was not soft, and it was not performance. It was a woman who had weighed everything carefully and made a decision with her eyes fully open, and she wanted me to know that she had made it. That she was here of her own choosing, knowing what she knew, and she was not going to qualify it or walk it back. That this was her decision fully, and she was at peace with it. I knew it, I felt it all the way through. The valley shook our hands afterward. Mrs. Dearborn kissed Clara's cheek at the reception, which cost her something and which Clara accepted graciously without making much of it. Emmett Greer's father found me near the end of the evening and shook my hand for a long time without saying anything at all. Price gave me a correct handshake and a correct sentence, and we were both glad to be done with each other. The Birch sons were not there, and I had not expected them to be. That evening, riding home under the June stars, Clara beside me on the bay mare she had named Temperance, a name I had been given no say in and did not argue with. She said very little, and so did I. And the ride home was about 16 miles of night air and quiet, and the sound of the horses, and that was enough. She kept teaching that summer. I had not asked her to stop, and I would not have. It was her work, and it was what she was, and a man who asks a woman to put down the thing she is, in exchange for the comfort of living in his house, does not deserve the house or the woman. She taught through June and into July, and in August, after the term ended, we rode out to the north pasture on a warm afternoon with good light and sat on horseback at the edge of it, and looked at the grass and the creek and the slope facing south. "You kept this," she said. "I came in to sign the sale papers the morning I met you," I said. She looked at the pasture. "What stopped you?" "I signed them," I said. "I didn't file them. I thought about it for a while and told Lund to shred them." She was quiet, looking at the grass. "It's good land," she said. "That's a good creek easement. What have you been using it for?" "Nothing for years." "That seems like a waste," she said it matter-of-factly. "It does," I said. She looked at the pasture for another minute, and I could see her thinking, assembling something, the way she did, piece by piece. "There are families in this valley who have no land and no prospect," she said. "3 of my students this year are from families like that, not visibly poor, just without. No property, no way to build toward anything. They are working for wages on other men's land, and the wages barely carry them through the winter." She paused. "Land like this with a water easement and that south slope could be farmed by a family, small lease, terms that let them build." I looked at the 40 acres. The grass was long and the light was good on it. "You're talking about giving someone a start." "I'm talking about you giving someone a start," she said. "The land is yours. The standing is yours. I have a short list of families who would work it." "What do you get from it?" She turned to look at me, the dry humor. "I get to live on a ranch where the man I married does things that matter," she said. "That is not nothing." I looked at the pasture. "Give me the list," I said. "We leased the north pasture that fall to a family named Ortega. Husband, wife, 4 children, the oldest a 12-year-old boy named Marco who had been in Clara's class the previous year. They broke ground before the first snow, and Asa helped with the preliminary fence work without being asked, and without mentioning that he was doing it. By the following spring, the Ortegas had a small house up and a garden in, and the first section of grain planted. And Marco Ortega came to school that fall with his arithmetic done, and his vocabulary doubled, and something in his carriage that had not been there the year before. The particular thing a boy gets when he can see something ahead of him worth working toward. Clara told me about it at supper. I did not say much. There was not much to say that added anything. There is a morning I keep coming back to. It was November, the 2nd November, nearly a year to the day from when I had ridden into Flats with a deed in my coat pocket and a plan to be done by noon. I had been up before first light, a habit I had never broken and had no intention of breaking, and by the time I came in from the first check on the south pasture, the sun was fully up and cold, and the frost was thick on the ground and on the fence rails. I came in through the back door and into the kitchen. Clara was already there. Not just present in the kitchen the way a guest is present in a room, in it the way a person is in a place that belongs to them, moving with that particular certainty of knowing where everything is and what everything does. She was at the stove, and she heard me come in, and without turning around she reached to the side and lifted a coffee cup and held it behind her. I took it. She went back to whatever was on the stove. I stood in the kitchen doorway and drank my coffee. The house was warm. It had the particular warmth of a house that has someone in it who has been in it for a while and made it warm, a different warmth than what you get from a banked stove in an empty house. Something with a person's weight to it. I had forgotten what that felt like, 4 years in, and now I had been living in it for 5 months, and I still noticed it every morning the way you'd notice water after a long, dry stretch, with a low-key amazement that you keep expecting to wear off and doesn't. She turned and set a plate in front of me, eggs and salt pork and potatoes with something in them, onion and pepper, and she sat across from me with her coffee and the stack of papers she always had. She had papers every morning. She read and made notes while I ate. Outside the frost was melting off the fence rails, and the light was doing its November thing, flat and white and clear. I could hear the hands at the bunkhouse starting their morning. I could hear the stove. I looked at her face while she read. She made a small sound under her breath at something on the page in front of her, disapproval or maybe interest, and picked up her pen and wrote something in the margin. Her handwriting was small and very clear, the writing of someone who had been writing on blackboards for years. I set down my fork. "Clara," I said. She looked up from the papers. I had no speech prepared for this. I had, in fact, spent no time deciding how to say it. I had been thinking about something since about 4 in the morning, out in the dark with the cold, and it had come into a shape that I wanted to say, but the words were not exactly there yet. I meant to say something about 4 years of an empty house, and about what it had felt like to have someone in that house again, not just someone, her, and what she had made of the mornings. About a 40-acre pasture that had been a dead weight and was now a start for somebody. About a boy named Marco Ortega who was going to grow up with something ahead of him. About a boy named Emmett who had walked 6 miles to return a book, because a woman had made him understand that returning things mattered. I meant to say something about standing at the edge of those cottonwoods on a cold November morning and watching her hold her face still coming down those steps, and about what it had cost me to watch it and do nothing. And what it had cost me over 4 years to do nothing about a lot of things, to be present in my own life in the most minimal way a man can be present and still be said to be alive. I meant to say something about what it felt like when she looked at me, the way she looked at me, not at the land, not at what the valley thought I was, at the man, at the specific person inside all of the rest of it. The man who had no patience for injustice, and who had been known to read novels in 3 days, and who had cried, quietly, alone at the last pages of a novel, which I was not going to admit, at a river and a raft and a boy going away from everything he knew. I meant to say all of that. I did not have the words for it, and I was not sure I ever would. I said, "I'm glad you're here." That was all. She looked at me across the table. She held the look for a moment, not the controlled look, the full one, and then she set the pen down and reached across and put her hand on mine. She held it with the same straightforward grip she gave everything, no softness for the sake of softness, no performance. Just her hand on mine, warm from the coffee cup, steady. She held it for a minute. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She always knew what was sufficient and what wasn't, and she knew that what I had said was the whole of it, and that saying anything back would have been adding to it unnecessarily. She let go and picked up her pen and went back to her papers. I went back to my eggs. The stove ticked with the heat. Outside, the light came up white and clear over the plain, and the frost came off the rails. In a while, the coffee was done, and she poured us both more from the pot without getting up, because she could reach it from where she sat, and I had moved the pot to that side of the stove in September because I noticed she could reach it from where she sat, and we had never discussed it. A man with land and a woman who sees him, not the land. Not the standing, not the thing the valley believes he is. The man inside all of that, seeing clearly all of it with her eyes open, and she chose it anyway, plainly, on her own terms. I looked for a better thing for a long time. I haven't found it. I don't expect to.